The IPO freeze is melting faster as two more high-profile IPOs launched this week. The Circle IPO may be in a tailspin as the company talks to Coinbase and Ripple about a potential acquisition. In IPO Radar news, Nvidia is investing in quantum computing, and Commonwealth Fusion raised another $1 billion to construct a giant magnetic donut. Welcome to the Access IPOs podcast, where we explore opportunities to invest in the world's most innovative and disruptive pre-IPO companies. I'm Craig Stevens, founder of AccessIPOs.com. The IPO freeze is starting to thaw. We saw eToro last week had a successful IPO. It was up, I think, 34% when it opened. CoreWeave is up more than 170% today from its IPO price. We also have two IPOs this week, this Thursday, and I'm recording this Thursday, and both of those have opened. Mountain priced at the top of the range at $16 a share. It opened at $21 a share. That's about a 30% pop, and actually went up to 25 something, and they had to halt it not long after the stock opened for trading. So small float there, smaller company, about a $1.5 billion IPO. And the second one was Hinge Health, opened a little bit after 1 o'clock. Hinge Health priced at the top of the range at $32 a share. Rang the opening bell on Thursday morning. Shares popped about 23% at the open, and generally a positive reception. When we see the IPO price at the top of the range or above the range like we saw for eToro, it's a pretty good sign there's demand for shares. Sometimes we see these deals price at the top of the range when maybe they could have gotten a little bit more money out of the deal. And I think that's in part because the underwriters don't want to raise the price too high or else demand will disappear. And it also triggers retail investors have to confirm their investment, and that just adds an extra step. And I think they like to show that they've priced this thing correctly. And at the top of the range, that's generally a good sign for trading. So both of these stocks, Hinge Health and Mountain, are out the door. Generally a good reception. So let's move on to some of the next deals that are coming. The window is open, and it's really up to the government at this point to screw things up. We saw yesterday there was some volatility in the market due to this budget bill that's going through. Of course, we can't control any of that, and we don't really pay attention to what the government's doing too much. But if it does bring enough volatility into the market, like it did on April 2nd when there was that tariff announcement, it can impact the IPO market for sure. I did not receive any shares. I put in for Mountain and I put in for Hinge Health at Fidelity. Didn't get an allocation. I did get a message from one follower on X who said that he got one share from E-Trade. Sometimes Morgan Stanley, when they're running the deals, they'll give some shares to E-Trade customers, but typically Morgan Stanley dishes out shares to their RIAs, their network of advisors who provide access to the IPO to their wealthiest customers. Unfortunately, we were left out of these two for the most part, but let me know if you did receive any access either through Fidelity or one of these other brokers. I like to know because I report on this and I tweet about it. So let me know if you got any access to any of these recent IPOs. So I think this recent performance of these companies who've come out, who've braved the markets to launch their IPOs, is a good sign for these other companies who are considering moving forward. And these are the ones that have submitted their S1 filings. We've got Klarna. We're still waiting for them. We're still waiting for Cerebras, who their CEO mentioned, I think it was this week or last week, that they are aspiring to IPO in 2025. Changed his tune a little bit. Doesn't seem as optimistic, but we'll see. We're not sure what's really behind that decision. And Chime is looking like it may be the next major candidate to go forward. They've released their S1 after the tariff announcement, and seeing a lot of analysis on that company on Twitter, X. Fintech enthusiasts seem to like it. A lot of metrics in that S1 we went over last week. So those are the three we're looking at. And of course, StubHub's still out there. StubHub's a little wishy-washy. They thought they were going to go public last year. It was too volatile for them when the market's going straight up. They released their S1 this year, pulled it back after the tariff. So that's another one in the pipeline, but I think Chime seems like the one most likely to move forward, and we'll be watching that. Of course, there's some other companies talking about moving forward later in the year, but I think we got to get through this first batch and get through the summer, get this next GDP rating, see if we are in a recession, and then companies will have enough data to decide if they want to move forward. And if indeed these companies are launching their IPOs and the valuations are higher or significantly higher than what they were in the private markets, and we might start to see some acquisition or some merger activity heat up. And that's exactly what we saw with one of our hopeful IPO candidates here, and that's Circle. Circle is a cryptocurrency company. It's known for its stablecoin, the USDC. It filed for an IPO on April 1st of this year. And then on April 2nd, the tariff announcement came out and just crushed the IPO market, crushed the overall market. Just really bad timing on that release. And this was exciting for the crypto universe, fintech fans and enthusiasts, and anyone who's following anything in crypto or stablecoin. So this was an exciting company to move forward with their IPO. And the first time I wrote about Circle was about 2 years ago. And it was really the first use case that made a lot of sense to me from a cryptocurrency standpoint. People have changed their tune about what Bitcoin is all about over the years. It used to be great for payments, and now it's just a storage of wealth, digital gold. Whereas these stable coins like the USDC from Circle, Ripple's also making a stable coin, and Ripple's got the XRP. These digital currencies are going to be used for transferring money around the world, to build them into apps, to build all kinds of interesting functionality regarding global payments, not only for individuals, but for corporations and governments. So a lot of big potential, a lot of enthusiasm around this kind of technology for this specific use case. So the first sign of this IPO possibly going astray was on April 30th, about a month after they released their S1 to the public. We got this article from Bloomberg reporters Matthew Monks and Ryan Gold that Ripple offered to buy stablecoin rival Circle for up to $5 billion, somewhere between $4 and $5 billion. So Ripple, another one of these cryptocurrency companies with a lot of fans and a lot of enthusiasm. People want to invest in the company. People want to buy XRP, their native currency. Ripple made an offer, apparently, to Circle. We don't know when, if it happened after the IPO filing or not. Circle rejected it as too low, according to people familiar with the matter, while Ripple remains interested in Circle, hasn't decided whether or not it's going to make another offer. So this would be a real merger of two powerhouses in crypto. Both we expect to go public, or we expected to go public within a year to 24 months. Ripple, we are waiting on some SEC activity to clear out. At this point, it seems like it could be within a year or 24 months that Ripple could go public, and Circle going first was exciting, and now Ripple and Circle are talking about a potential merger of some kind. And then this week on May 19th, the article from Fortune's Luisa Beltran, Circle pursues IPO, but talks with Coinbase and Ripple could mean a sale, sources say. So when I saw this article from Fortune, my jaw dropped. I thought, oh no, Coinbase is going to swallow up one of our IPOs that's in the pipeline. Now, of course, Coinbase is arguably the most well-known or the largest cryptocurrency company or pure cryptocurrency company. It just entered the S&P 500. Stock symbol is COIN. It's a public company. It had its IPO a few years ago. It's been around since pretty early days of cryptocurrencies. In this article, it says here, Circle Internet Financial, the issuer of USDC, filed paperwork. Okay, we know that. And it says there's a chance, though, that Circle's IPO won't come to fruition since the company has recently taken part in informal talks to sell itself to Coinbase Global, the largest crypto exchange in the U.S., or to crypto payments company Ripple, according to 4 banking and private equity executives. These people, who asked not to be identified, said Circle is seeking at least $5 billion, which is a valuation that it's targeting for its IPO. Quote by one of the sources, if Coinbase wanted to buy them, Circle would sell in a heartbeat. Another person said things change week by week. Goes on to say Circle is still committed to going public, but it has yet to set terms and it hasn't launched yet. So as we're waiting for the Circle IPO, they're having talks with Coinbase. They're having talks with Ripple, which we already knew from about a month ago. And according to one of these bankers, Circle wants to sell to Coinbase if Coinbase is really interested. There was a quote from Brian Armstrong in the article as well, where it said he told Bloomberg on May 14th that he was very excited for Circle's success. They're going public, doesn't change anything about our commercial relationship. But in terms of other deals we might consider in the future, I mean, that of course would be up to them and us, but nothing to announce today. Nothing to announce on May 14th, but Fortune reported this discussion on May 19th. Sometimes when these companies go public and their financials come to light in the S1 filing, companies get interested in buying them. It's almost a way for Circle to showcase itself to potential suitors, and if nobody wants to buy them, then they go ahead and go public. You would think it would take a lot of work to put all that together, and certainly takes work to get ready to IPO and to get your processes in place and everything that's compliance ready to go public. But then to turn around and sell yourself right before you go public, it definitely happens. We don't like it to happen as people who want more public companies out there. Coinbase is a $68 billion company. That's their market cap. So if they were to swallow up this $5 billion, $6 billion Circle, it's not going to have a huge impact on Coinbase's stock price. So you could invest indirectly in Coinbase, and maybe that would be your move. But we prefer to see these companies come out and be public so we can get them into our index funds, or we can buy them individually to participate in the growth. And if Circle's really has this incredible growth ahead of them, we'd rather see it happen starting at about a $6 billion, $7 billion company, and then going to the moon rather than doing it inside Coinbase, which sort of dilutes the value of this company going forward. Ripple is a $11 or $12 billion company according to Caplight, a secondary marketplace that I follow. Circle was last valued at about $8.1 billion back in April 2022. Secondary pricing puts it around $6.8 billion right now, and it was seeking this $5 billion IPO, but I think we're looking at probably closer to $7 billion based on this private market information. And if Ripple's only offering $4 to $5 billion, I can see why Circle's going to reject that, obviously. And we can't rule out some of the bigger companies that have lots of money floating around, like a Google or a Microsoft or somebody who wants to get into crypto. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this Coinbase deal sounds more likely. There's a better fit. But at this point, we're on pins and needles, just waiting for Circle to update their terms. And about a month after that S1, you would start to see the terms added with an amended filing. And we had the tariff delay, so that pushed a lot of these companies off 3 to 4 weeks. So sometime between now and the end of June, if Circle is going to move forward with this IPO, we would hope to see that amended filing soon. And if it's going to move forward with an acquisition and either merge with Ripple or get acquired by Coinbase, then we could see that anytime. That might happen before I publish this podcast Saturday morning at 10 o'clock Eastern time. So Fridays are a time when these kinds of announcements happen as well. Fridays and Mondays. Actually, mergers, acquisitions are usually more on Mondays. So that could certainly happen soon, especially since Cat's already out of the bag with this fortune reporting. My hope, and most of our listeners and readers hope to see this thing go public. We hope to get some IPO access for customers. Those of us who like IPOs and want to see young companies that are smaller, that have that big growth trajectory in front of them, we'd like to see this thing go public so we can buy in at the ground floor. Will it become a $100 billion company? I have no idea. I haven't done the hard research on this company, and I don't follow the crypto space aside from these companies that are moving toward their IPOs. I'm not a big crypto enthusiast, although I do see the use cases from Ripple and from Circle. And so I want to see these use cases come to fruition where they are partnering with banks and moving money internationally. So companies can bypass the SWIFT transfer system that's outdated and expensive and slow. Circle's USDC coin will help to facilitate all kinds of transactions internationally with much less friction than the status quo. If we do get an amended S1 and they update the filing with the terms, then we can expect the IPO about a week or so, 10 days after that event. So we'll be watching for the IPO roadshow and that filing, and we'll keep it in the top 10 of the upcoming IPOs list on my website. Let's move on to IPO Radar news. This is when I talk about companies that are on the Access IPO's radar list. There's about 150 to 200 companies that I follow, and these are generally companies that are growing fast, that have a lot of public interest. So people who are interested in either the company or the technology or the industry. And generally speaking, it's companies that people want to invest in, but they are private. And I'm not talking about venture capitalists. They're doing their thing. This is about retail investors who want to be able to participate in the next wave of technology that's coming out of the startup world. Today, I'm going to highlight two companies that are in two emerging industries that are not quite mature. Companies in this space are certainly not profitable, don't have a lot of revenue, and they're still working on the technology that's going to be that growth opportunity in the next 5 to 20 years. And these two industries address serious bottlenecks that are going to hinder innovation if these two bottlenecks are not addressed. And the two industries I'm talking about are quantum computing and fusion energy. So we've got this bottleneck in computing, or it's starting to happen, where AI is taking up more computing power. You need more chips, you need stronger, faster chips, more efficient chips, and they're sucking up a ton of energy. On the energy side, we still have the legacy dirty fuels like coal and natural gas, and we have nuclear, which hasn't had the investment that it's needed over the past 30 years. And so at some point, we're going to need a new, cleaner source of energy that's more abundant, that's lower in cost, and that's potentially fusion energy. And we're past the point where fusion is 30 years away. And there's an old joke about that. But fusion is looking more like a 5 to 10 year period from now, where societies will be benefiting from it. And quantum computing could be in the same range, about 5 to 10 years. But there's a lot of excitement around startups in the spaces. And there's even a few public companies in the quantum computing space. But one of the companies on our radar is called PsiQuantum. PsiQuantum is working on quantum computing. And the big news this week that we heard is that Nvidia is looking to invest in PsiQuantum. We heard back in March, it was an exclusive Reuters article, that PsiQuantum was raising at least $750 million at a $6 billion valuation. And I got to say, I've been seeing opportunities to invest in this company on the pre-IPO marketplaces, the secondary marketplaces. They are trying to fill up this funding round. And we got an article this week that says Nvidia is in talks to invest in quantum startup PsiQuantum. This was broken by The Information by Anissa Gardazi. So nice scoop from The Information. I don't have a subscription to that website, so I don't know what it's all about, but I think we pretty much get what we need. The headline that NVIDIA is looking to invest in quantum computing. That's a big deal. Although I'm not surprised because NVIDIA has a lot of venture capital investments. It's heavily invested in AI and various technologies, so no surprise it's getting into quantum computing. And I have read that NVIDIA is doing work on building chips for quantum computing, and quantum computing just doesn't work yet, right? But when it does, and if and when it does, and there's pretty good signs that the if isn't valid anymore. This is going to be a technology that works in the future, but they have to refine it and get it to work. But it's going to be a significant jump in computing power. And so NVIDIA, of course, wants to be a part of that. They've got money to invest into venture capital. So a little bit about PsiQuantum. Quantum computing startup founded in 2016 by Jeremy O'Brien and colleagues from the University of Bristol in the UK. It's got ties to the Australian government. It says its headquarters are in Palo Alto, and it's working on building the first U.S. utility-scale quantum computer in Chicago. PsiQuantum is working on a fault-tolerant quantum computer to achieve 1 million physical qubits, far surpassing today's quantum systems. So always good to see a big name like NVIDIA investing into one of our radar companies, because that's a sign of approval for PsiQuantum if NVIDIA is willing to put up some money. But they've got a lot of big names that have invested. Atomico, Bally Gifford, BlackRock, Founders Fund, Redpoint Ventures, Temasek. So a lot of big names in venture capital have invested in this. The last round completed Series D in September 2021. Estimated valuation about $3.15 billion. They raised $450 million. This round is looking like it's going to give them a $6 billion valuation, raising $750 million. Now, I'm not going to pretend I understand quantum computing. I actually understand fusion energy a little bit better than I understand quantum computing, but I do know that it's going to significantly or drastically improve the amount of computing that our processors can do, which will then empower AI to do crazier things and better things to push innovation into the next century. So PsiQuantum, one to watch for our radar. Go to accessipos.com, type in PsiQuantum, PsiQuantum, in the search button up in the top right corner of the website if you want to learn more about it. I'll put a link in the description as well. Last story I want to talk about today is Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They've raised another $1 billion in private funding. Story was by Axios Pro. They broke this story, and not a lot of reporting on it otherwise, but I really caught wind of this because I'm familiar with this company. I've written about the company. And this $1 billion investment apparently comes from a hyperscale data center developer and well-known tech company. They don't say specifically who it is, but the reporter called Microsoft, they called Google, and both of them declined to comment. So it seems like it's probably Microsoft or Google that made this $1 billion investment. Of course, Microsoft and Google need to power data centers into the next century. So one of them is making an investment of $1 billion. And there may be other investors involved. And this investment will help them build out their SPARC. And SPARC is a prototype fusion reactor they're building in Massachusetts. SPARC stands for Smallest Possible Affordable Robust Compact Prototype, as a proof of concept at its headquarters. Commonwealth Fusion came out of MIT program for fusion energy. It's got some incredibly bright people working on it. They're building this prototype SPARC. It's actually called a Tokamak, and a Tokamak is essentially a giant 3D donut-shaped object made of magnets, of extremely powerful magnets. And for a fusion reaction to happen, one of the techniques is this Tokamak technique where there's this plasma and the magnets somehow compress the plasma, and that leads to the fusion reaction. And this has never been successfully done, but apparently Commonwealth has done the modeling and the work to suggest that this is going to work, that they're willing to invest billions of dollars, and that multiple high-profile investors are willing to also invest money so they can bring this prototype to fruition. They can execute their proof of concept, and from there, go on to build their first power plant in Richmond, Virginia. Back in February 25, I went to a fusion energy conference in Washington, D.C. at Union Station. And I live in Virginia, so it was just a short drive for me, but I've been very interested in this industry, and I've written about a lot of companies in the space. And I had a lot of conversations there trying to understand the different technologies and, more importantly, understand the companies that I was writing about better. And the question I had for everyone I got into a conversation with was, which of these techniques and strategies, which of these companies is furthest along in their development of achieving a successful ignition of fusion energy? And the answer was always Commonwealth Fusion. So everybody in the industry thinks that they're the furthest along. And you can go on their YouTube channel. They have a lot of interesting videos about what they're working on. You can see their SPARC prototype, which is still being built. There's still a lot of engineering challenges, as I understand, one of which is that this fusion reaction lets off neutrons, which is a radioactive material, and apparently that can degrade the materials that this thing is constructed with. So if you're building this massive 3D donut out of all these metals and magnets, and when you have the output that's going to degrade that material, then how do you deal with that, and how do you protect the equipment from long-term degradation? So the company has modeled this Tokamak. They are building the thing. They're going to test it. And while there still may be some challenges, the only way to really know if this is going to work is to build it. And so they're getting a lot of money. And apparently there's a hyperscaler now. It's possibly Microsoft, possibly Google or Amazon or someone else willing to put up $1 billion for this. And hopefully within the next 3 to 5 years, this prototype is showing some sort of results. And then the earliest we could see fusion energy being produced commercially is going to be in the 2030s. And I think you could probably bet at this point be the mid-2030s if it's going to happen. As I was at this conference, CEO of Commonwealth Fusion, Bob Mumgard, was on stage with Senator Mark Warner from Virginia talking about this collaboration with this Massachusetts company into Virginia where they're going to build this plant. I guess the property and the location and the needs of Commonwealth Fusion and what they're building aligned with Virginia, and so Virginia won this contract or this commitment to build this power plant in Virginia. And so it's exciting to be in my state, but this company is still a long way away from making this happen. There's substantial engineering challenges ahead. A couple other companies in the space, Zap Energy, they hosted a happy hour at this conference, and I was actually having drinks around CEOs of these companies. They hosted a very nice happy hour. Another one I've written about is TAE Technologies. And then the one that gets probably the most press is Helion Energy, and it gets a lot of press because one of their primary investors is Sam Altman, founder, of course, of OpenAI, longtime Y Combinator guy. Everyone knows Sam Altman. The lab at Lawrence Livermore created the first net positive fusion reaction a few years ago, and they did it with 192 lasers pointing down at this one little tiny ball. So this is extraordinary engineering and physics, but we've got smart people working on it. We've got a lot of money going there. And if it works, it could mean limitless power for the rest of time, near limitless power and at very low cost. So the big picture here is if you can combine this quantum computing with this new type of energy, this clean energy, then you can reduce that bottleneck of computing and energy that we need for the next generation of innovation, especially in AI. But who knows what's going to emerge in innovation when there's limitless, inexpensive, and clean energy, and nearly limitless quantum computing power that's reliable and cost efficient. So 2 technologies that I write about pretty frequently on the website. I haven't talked about too much on the podcast yet, but certainly topics that I will be addressing again in the future. That's all for the show. Slower week in news than the previous week. If you listen to episode 11, man, there was tons of news and I left out tons of it. This week, just not as much big news coming through. There were some other stories, but I like to be selective on what I talk about. There are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to follow or like us on wherever you consume your podcast or your videos. Spotify, there's video. YouTube, there's videos. But just hit that subscribe button or that like button. And while you're at it, especially if you're on Spotify, there's a star. And if you click that star button and hit the 5-star review, I'd really appreciate it. That helps me grow the show. Helps more listeners get interested in the show. You can do that on Apple as well. And you don't have to write a review. You just click that star and it shows up as a positive review. You can also subscribe to the Access IPOs newsletter. This is my email list. I send an email on Sundays to remind everybody that there's a new podcast episode. I also highlight stories that maybe happened after the podcast was recorded, or I highlight other radar stories that didn't get covered in the podcast that either were too long to talk about or not as interesting. So that comes out in the newsletter. It's also a free download if you sign up for the newsletter. It's called From Startup to IPO. It kind of steps you through in a one-page how companies go from being nothing or seed funded to being a public company. So pretty cool download, just a one-pager when you sign up. You can also check out the links in the description or the show notes where we have links to our partners. If you sign up for accounts through our partners, we may receive a commission for that. It's just a way you can support the show. If you use one of those links, there's no additional cost to you. Those are affiliate links. It's how online creators make money. And if you do that, I appreciate your support. Last thing you can do is join the Access Club. This is a exclusive membership community for Access IPO's subscribers of the newsletter and listeners and watchers. So if you want to support the show that way on Patreon, you're actually going to get a lot of bonus content. I send a weekly update on news that doesn't get covered in the newsletter or the podcast. It's still radar news, but I cover all these different companies, about 200 of them. And so all the news articles that I review throughout the week and I get alerts on stuff, I put that into a post and it goes on to the Access Club page. You also get an update for weekly deals where I highlight pre-IPO and secondary marketplace deal alerts, either funds or specific deals that usually are hard to come by, or just kind of comparing prices to see where things are headed. That is exclusive to members, and members also get access to me directly through a chat and messaging on the Patreon. Go to patreon.com/accessipos, or if you just go to accessipos.com, there's a link at the top. Look for the red star. That's all for the show this week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you next week. This video is not a recommendation to buy or sell any startups mentioned. Pre-IPO and IPO investing involves significant risk. Conduct due diligence by reading the SEC S1 filings before participating in IPOs. Do not invest in IPOs with money you cannot afford to lose. Thanks for watching.